She left the arena without a word, and the Alpha King followed her into the snow. I dismissed her on a Tuesday. That detail has no dignity to it, but it is the truth. I stood in my own council chamber with the fire behind me and 6 advisors at the long table, and I told Sareth Kale, captain of my arena guard and the finest fighter in 3 mountain holds, that her services were no longer required. I told her this while my new betrothal agreement sat drying on the table, the ink still wet, the seal of House Voren still warm, because Counselor Dress had spent 4 weeks convincing me that Sareth's presence at court made the Voren family uncomfortable, and because I had been, in that season, a fool. She had been standing 3 feet from the door. She always stood near exits in formal rooms. I had noticed that about her in the first week she served, and I had never asked why, and now I would not have the chance. She said, "Understood, my king." Nothing else. No argument. No bid for reconsideration. She turned and she left, and the door of my council chamber closed with the quietest possible sound, which was somehow worse than a slam, and I sat down at the long table and listened to Counselor Dress begin talking about the Voren wedding timeline, and I kept my face entirely still for the rest of the meeting, and my wolf did not make a sound for 3 months. That silence was the worst part. My wolf had always been restless. 29 years of restlessness. He paced the inside of my chest during councils, surfaced in the middle of border negotiations, woke me at odd hours with a low unease I had no name for. 3 of my advisors had commented, at various points, that I seemed distracted. I was not distracted. I was haunted by something I could not identify, and that had been my ordinary state since I took the crown at 19. Sareth Kale had joined my guard 8 months before the council chamber. She had come up through the open arena bracket in Koreth's spring tournament. Anonymous entry. No house affiliation. Just a fighter with short-cropped dark hair and the kind of stillness that made a room pay attention. She beat 3 ranked champions in succession without showmanship, without cruelty, simply with a precision that made it look inevitable. I had watched from the upper gallery. My wolf went quiet. That was new. That was the only time in 29 years that he had simply stopped. I hired her as captain on the spot, which surprised my council. It surprised Sareth too, though she didn't show it. She showed almost nothing, which was also new, because most people in my presence showed a great deal nerves or ambition or the careful performance of loyalty. Sareth showed up to her first briefing 8 minutes early, stood at the correct distance, gave me accurate threat assessments in plain language, and at no point tried to make me like her. I found this remarkable. For 8 months she ran my arena guard with the same quiet precision she brought to a fight. She never asked for anything beyond what the role required. She didn't linger after meetings. She didn't seek my attention. My wolf was calmer in those 8 months than he had been in a decade, and I told myself it was because I trusted her competence, which was true, but was not the whole truth, and I did not investigate the rest of it. Then came the Voren alliance, and Counselor Dress and the drying ink. I will not defend the decision. I could reconstruct the reasoning. The mountain passes the Voren family controlled, the trade route disputes, the political weight of the match, but reasoning isn't the same as rightness, and I knew the difference even then. What I knew and what I did were 2 separate things, and the gap between them is what I have spent 3 months learning the exact dimensions of. My wolf went silent the morning after she left and stayed silent. Not the quiet she had given him, this was different. This was the silence of something that has closed a door. I conducted myself correctly. I completed my engagements, reviewed my treaties, responded to my correspondence. I rode the border inspections in the 2nd month and the Voren betrothal dinner in the 3rd. I shook hands I did not want to shake. I sat across from a woman I respected, but felt nothing for, and told myself that a king's feelings were a secondary matter. My wolf disagreed. He did not express this in words. He expressed it by staying closed, like a room sealed against winter, and I did not sleep well, and I did not speak of it to anyone. I heard through my guard's ordinary intelligence channels that Sareth had registered for the winter tournament. Open bracket, independent entry, no house sponsorship. I read this in a briefing document and set it aside, and then I read it again, and then I set it aside again, and then I attended the winter tournament as a formality because Koreth's king always attends, and because I refused to do otherwise, and I sat in the upper gallery with my advisors and my betrothed's father, Lord Voren himself, and told myself I was not looking for her. I was looking for her. She came into the bracket in the second round, which meant she had won her first bout in the early morning draw. I had not been there for that. I was there for the second. The winter arena at Koreth is stone-walled on 3 sides and open to the sky at the north. The cold comes in off the mountain, and the breath of the fighters hangs white in the air. The sand is mixed with salt to keep it from freezing solid. Torches run the perimeter when the light drops. It smells like iron and cold stone and something clean, which I have always liked. And that afternoon it was loud. 600 whole country people shouting for their regional fighters, the bracket board turning, vendors moving through the stands with hot wine and river meat pies. Sareth walked into the arena gate and the noise did not change for her, because she had entered anonymously and no one in the stands recognized her yet. She wore plain gray fighting leather with no insignia. Her hair was the same, short, dark, cut without vanity. She had her own weapons, a short paired blade style she developed herself that I had watched in training bouts and found quietly astonishing. Her opponent was a ranked fighter from the Drennan lowlands, broad through the shoulders, a full head taller, with a regional following that filled half the stands. He had won this bracket 2 years running. Sareth studied him for approximately 4 seconds, and then the bout began. My wolf woke up. Not gradually, not with the slow surfacing I was used to. He came up all at once, like a man who has been underwater for 3 months and finally breaches, and I felt the breath go out of me in the upper gallery and gripped the railing and said nothing, because Lord Voren was to my right and Councillor Dress was to my left, and I am a king, and kings do not grip railings. I watched her dismantle the Drennan champion in 4 minutes and 30 seconds. It was not flashy. It was the same thing I had watched in the spring tournament, that terrible inevitability, that precision that made every move look like the only possible move. When it was done, the arena floor was still and the Drennan crowd was very quiet, and Sareth stepped back from the fallen fighter, checked his breathing, and walked back to the gate. She did not look at the gallery. She did not look anywhere except where she needed to look. She walked through the gate and disappeared, and the noise of the arena came back up around me, and Lord Voren said something I didn't hear, and I turned and smiled at him and said something appropriate, and my wolf burned in my chest like a banked fire someone has just opened the flue on. She won the next 2 bouts in the same afternoon session. By the third, the crowd knew who she was. Someone in the stands had recognized her from her spring tournament record, and the word moved fast. By the quarterfinal, she had a following. People who had seen her before, people who had heard of her, people who simply watched her and understood instinctively that they were seeing something unusual. I watched all of it. I should not have been watching all of it. I had obligations in the gallery. Lord Voren was conducting informal trade discussions to my right, Councillor Dress was mediating on my left, and the entire purpose of my presence was diplomatic. I was not diplomatic. I was fixed on the arena floor with an attention I had not felt for anything in 3 months, and I managed the appearance of a divided focus, but the reality was simple and undivided, and my wolf made sure of it. She did not look at the gallery. In 4 bouts, through the noise and the bracket board and the crowd building behind her name, she did not once look up at the upper seats where she would have known I was sitting. I do not know if this was deliberate. I suspect it was deliberate. I know her well enough, knew her well enough, to understand that Sareth Kale did nothing by accident. The quarterfinal ended at the second torchlighting of the evening, when the cold had come down properly, and the torches along the arena perimeter were the primary light, and everything was gold and black, and the breath of the fighters made small clouds in the air. She won in 6 minutes. The crowd made a sound that was less like cheering and more like recognition, the sound a crowd makes when it has just watched something it knows it will remember. I sat in the gallery and my wolf pressed against my ribs, and I did not send word to her, and I did not go down to the fighter's entrance, and I told myself this was correct because I was the king of Korath, and I had obligations and a betrothal and a man to my right who controlled the northern passes, and my own desires were secondary matters. I have already told you I was a fool. I am not revising that assessment. The semi-final was the next morning. I returned to the gallery before Lord Voren arrived, before Dress arrived, before most of the court had found their seats, and I sat in the cold morning air and watched the bracket board and waited, which was not a thing I did with any grace or dignity, but I did it anyway. She appeared in the arena gate at the listed time, which was exactly what she always did, arrived when she was supposed to arrive, not early to make a point and not late to make a different point, simply present when the moment required presence. She wore the same gray leather. She had, I noticed, a slight mark on her right forearm that I didn't recognize, a bruise from the previous day's bouts, probably, though she moved as though nothing hurt. She beat the semi-final opponent in 8 minutes. He was the better match, ranked first in the spring circuit, fast, experienced, smart about distance. And she had to work for it. And watching her work for it was somehow worse than watching the easy victories because it showed the effort underneath the precision, the cost of the capability. And I felt something in my chest that was not my wolf and was not strategic and had no name I was prepared to give it. When the bout ended, she was breathing hard. She stood in the center of the arena floor in the cold morning air with her hands at her sides, and her breath making white clouds and the crowd making noise above her, and she looked up. Not at the gallery, not at me. She looked up at the open north wall, at the sky, at the mountain above the arena that was white with snow all the way down to the tree line. She looked at it for a moment the way people look at something they have come to a private understanding with. Then she walked back to the gate. My wolf pressed his forehead against my ribs, exactly as he had done in the 8 months she ran my guard, and did not make a sound. The final was that afternoon. By now the tournament had arranged itself around Sareth's bracket the way tournaments do, when one fighter has made themselves impossible to ignore. The whole lords in the gallery were discussing her openly. Lord Voren's adjutant had made inquiries about her record. Councillor Dress, sitting to my left, had twice begun sentences and stopped them when he noticed how I was looking at the arena floor. I noticed him noticing. I did not adjust my expression. Her final opponent was a Korath fighter, home crowd, hometown support, a decorated record, a professional. They were well matched on paper in a way that was genuinely uncertain, which happens rarely enough in open bracket tournaments that the crowd felt it and went louder than they had all weekend. The bout ran for 12 minutes. It was the hardest fight I had ever watched her have full contact, both of them working, both of them intelligent about the fight and about each other. At 4 minutes she had a cut above her left eye from a hilt catch, and I gripped the railing again and made myself not stand up, which was a significant act of will. At 8 minutes she shifted her footwork and found something in the angle that the Korath fighter hadn't expected, and the balance of the bout changed. At 12 minutes it was over. The crowd made a great deal of noise. The Korath fighter was on his feet and gracious, and the bracket official moved to the center to make the formal declaration, and I sat in the upper gallery with my wolf burning like a fire that has been opened to full draw, and Lord Voren said something congratulatory beside me, and I turned to respond. The mate mark came like lightning. Not metaphorically. I mean it arrived with the physical force of something structural giving way, a hot line burning from my left wrist to my elbow, the mark rising through my skin in silver gold as though it had always been there under the surface, and had simply decided in that specific moment that enough time had been wasted. I looked down at it. The gallery around me went sharp and then distant. I heard from somewhere far below a sound, a single sharp intake of breath from the arena floor, and I looked up. Sarath was standing in the center of the arena. She was looking at her left wrist. The same mark, rising through her skin in the same silver gold, vivid enough to see clearly from the gallery. The bracket official had stopped speaking. The crowd had gone very quiet in the particular way. Crowds go quiet when they have just seen something they don't have a word for. 600 people and every hold lord in the gallery, including Lord Voron to my right, watching the mate mark rise simultaneously on the wrist of the King of Korath and the wrist of the woman standing on the arena floor. Sarath looked at her wrist for a moment, then she looked up, not at the mountain this time, at the gallery, at me. Her face was composed and still, and I could not read anything in it from that distance, which was, in its way, an answer. She held my gaze for 3 seconds. Then she turned and walked toward the arena gate, and the crowd parted for her, and she walked through it and out of sight, and the winter arena was very quiet. I stood up. My king, dress, at my elbow, his voice carrying the specific compressed urgency of a man trying to contain a crisis in a word and a half. Not now, I was already moving. The Voron family. Later. I put a hand briefly on Lord Voron's arm. He was a fair man. I had always known that, and the look on his face was not anger but the particular resignation of a man who has just watched fate make a decision above his rank. My lord, I owe you a conversation, and you will have it tonight with every honesty I can offer you, but there is something I have to do first. He looked at my wrist. At the mark still burning there, he said, "Yes, I expect there is." I left the gallery. The fighter's entrance is at the base of the eastern wall below the stands, a stone corridor that opens onto a small enclosed yard where the fighters cool down after bouts. I had been there 3 times in my reign for championship presentations, for a serious injury in the first year that required my presence, once to compliment a fighter from an allied hold whose goodwill I was cultivating. I knew the way. I went quickly. The yard was empty. A fighter's attendant was packing equipment in the far corner. I looked at him. He looked at the mark on my wrist, still visible, silver gold against my skin, and pointed to the far gate without being asked. The far gate opened onto the frozen courtyard at the arena's back. It was a wide space, a practice ground in summer, empty now, snow-packed, the light fading toward early dusk, the mountain white above the far wall. The cold came off the stone like something physical. Sarath was 20 meters ahead of me, walking toward the far gate that led to the city proper. Her gray leather, her short dark hair, her unhurried pace. She had collected her weapons and her small kit bag. She had not run. She was walking with the same deliberate evenness she brought to everything, and it made my chest ache in a way I did not try to categorize. I said her name. She did not stop. I said it again, louder, and my breath made a white cloud in the cold air, and the courtyard was very quiet. Just the crunch of my boots on the snow and the distant sound of the arena crowd reassembling itself after the disruption of the mate mark. 600 people settling back into noise while I crossed a frozen courtyard after the woman I had failed in a council chamber 8 months ago. She did not stop. I kept walking. The cold was serious, the mountain cold that gets inside your armor in minutes and makes your fingers slow. And I had come out in my gallery clothes, which were not cold weather clothes, and I was aware of this in a distant way that I did not allow to become relevant. She had 15 meters on me and my legs were longer, and I closed the gap steadily. And I thought about what I was going to say, and I had nothing, and so I decided to say the truth. 10 meters 5. Sarath. She stopped. Not turning. She stood with her back to me, 3 meters from the far gate, her kit bag at her side, and the cold moved between us, and the mate mark on my wrist gave off a faint warmth that had nothing to do with the temperature and everything to do with the 8 feet of space between me and the only person my wolf had ever gone quiet for. I said, "I know I don't have the standing to ask anything of you." She said nothing. I made a decision in September that I understood was wrong when I made it. I made it anyway. There isn't an accounting for that comes out well on my side. The cold was getting into my collar and I didn't move. You left without giving me the argument you were owed. You were owed one and you didn't take it, and I have thought about that every week since. Still nothing. The back of her head, her stillness, the mountain white above the far wall. "The mark," I said, "you saw it." "I saw it." Her voice was even. She was not cold even, not controlled against emotion. She was genuinely even, which was one of the most specific things about her, the thing that had made my counsel uncomfortable and made my wolf go calm. "I've been feeling it for 8 months. It came up through my skin 2 hours ago. I processed this 8 months. Since the spring tournament. The day you hired me." My wolf made a sound. Not a howl, just a long exhale, the sound of something putting down a weight it has been carrying too long. "Then I dismissed you," I said. "You dismissed me, still even, yes." "Without asking you whether," I started again. "The mark, the decision in September. I made it as though the mark wasn't there, as though you hadn't been." I stopped again. "There are things that have no clean sentence. I was a fool." "You were a king making a political calculation," she said. "I understand what that is. Understanding it isn't the same as it being right." She didn't answer that. The cold pressed in. I stood in the frozen courtyard in my gallery clothes with my breath misting and the mate mark on my wrist and the distance between us, and I thought about the Tuesday in September and the quiet sound of the council chamber door and the 3 months since, and I said, "I want to ask you something. As a request, not as a command." She turned around. Her face was what it always was, composed, still, the eyes that took everything in and gave nothing away by accident. There was the cut above her left eye from the final bout, cleaned but not fully closed. There was snow on her shoulder from somewhere. She looked at me the way she had looked up at the mountain that morning, with the particular attention of someone who has arrived at a private understanding and is deciding whether to share it. "Ask," she said. "Come back to Koreth Hold. Not as a guard captain, not in any capacity that is professional or convenient or useful to me. Come back because," I looked at the mark on my wrist, the silver gold of it still warm against the cold, "because you are the only person in 8 months that my wolf has been at rest for, and I did a cowardly thing, and I want to spend whatever time you'll allow me undoing it." She looked at me for a long time. The cold moved between us. "That's one," she said. I waited. "You said come back. What happens to the Voron betrothal?" "Lord Voron saw the mark. I will speak to him tonight fully and honestly, and the betrothal will not proceed. That is not conditional on your answer." I held her gaze. "I am not asking you to rescue me from a political arrangement. That is already resolved. I am asking something separate." "Two," she said. She was not warming toward me, not yet, but she was still listening, which was more than I had earned. "If I come back, what is my role?" "Whatever you want it to be," I said. "Guard captain if you want it and find it satisfying. Nothing to do with the guard if you'd rather. I will not assign you a role to make it easier to be near you. That is not an honest way to do this." I paused. "I will be honest with you from now on. You had honest assessments of everything in my guard, and you never had an honest assessment of what I stopped. That changes." She studied me. The mountain stood white above the far wall. The torches along the arena were lighting, one by one, orange against the early dusk, and from the gallery windows of the great hall I could see, if I turned, the shapes of people watching. Hold lords and advisors, silhouettes in the warm light. I did not turn. "3," Sareth said. You said whatever time I'll allow. I want to know what you mean by that. This was the question I had prepared the least for, and it was, of course, the right one. I mean, I said carefully, that I understand I have no claim on your forgiveness and no right to assume it's available. The mark is there. That is a fact. But a fact isn't consent, and I am not a man who confuses the two. I want to earn your trust back if you'll let me try. I am asking for the chance to try. Nothing beyond that, not until you say otherwise. The cold, the torches, the white mountain. Sarath looked at her left wrist at the mark there, silver gold, the twin of the one on mine. She looked at it for a long moment, the way she had looked at the sky that morning privately, arriving at something. Then she looked up at me. "All right," she said. That was all, 2 words, the same evenness she brought to everything. Not a flood of relief, not the grand reversal I had been building toward in my head during 3 months of not sleeping. Just 2 words, straightforward and clear, which was exactly how she talked and exactly what I should have expected, and was somehow more than I had prepared myself for. My wolf leaned against my ribs, not urgent this time, not burning, just present, settled. "I owe you a better first conversation than a frozen courtyard," I said. "You owe me a great deal more than that." But there was something in it, not quite warmth, not yet, but the beginning of the shape that warmth would eventually take. The faint edge of something that was not quite a smile, on the face of a person who did not smile easily. "I know," I said. "I intend to pay it." She tilted her head toward the great hall. "Then you should go speak to Lord Voren." Yes. I didn't move for another moment. The mark on my wrist was warm in the cold air, and hers was the same, and the distance between us was only 3 feet now, and I did not close it because that was not yet mine to do. "Thank you for stopping." "You said my name enough times," she said. "It seemed rude to keep walking." I said you could have kept walking. "I know," she said, and there it was, not a smile but the full edge of one, just for a second before she settled back into herself. I decided not to. I spoke to Lord Voren for 2 hours that night. He was, as I had told Sarath, a fair man, a pragmatist with enough experience to understand that a mate mark witnessed by 600 people, and every hold lord in the gallery, was not a thing to argue with, and enough dignity to accept the dissolution of the betrothal without rancor. We renegotiated the trade arrangement on its own terms, separated cleanly from the marriage agreement, and by the end of the 2 hours we had shaken hands, and I believed we would remain on reasonable terms, which was the best possible outcome and more than I deserved. Dress was waiting outside the chamber. He had the expression of a man who has spent several hours revising his position. "The captain of the arena guard has returned," he said carefully. "She has. And the Voren arrangement is concluded, fairly, I believe. I'll give you the details in the morning." I looked at him. Dress was not a bad man. He was a cautious man with a narrow view of what constituted a king's appropriate concerns, and those 2 things had led him somewhere I was not willing to follow. "I want you to know that I understand what happened in September. I understand the recommendation you made, and I understand why you made it. And I want you to understand clearly that it will not happen again." He absorbed this. "She is extraordinarily capable," he said finally. "The mark was visible, my king, quite visible." "I know." "The Hold Lord saw it." "I know." "They will not," he stopped, reconsidered. "I believe they will not make difficulties," he said, "given the circumstances." "No," I said, "I don't believe they will either." She was given the same quarters she'd had before, the East Tower room with the window that faced the mountain. I did not arrange this, or rather I arranged only that the decision be left to her, and she chose the East Tower room herself, which told me something. The first week was careful. She was there. I was there. We moved through the spaces of Korath Hold with the particular awareness of 2 people who know something has changed, but are taking the measure of it before they say so. She resumed the arena guard captaincy because she said it was what she was good at, and she saw no reason to pretend otherwise, which was characteristic. She attended the morning briefings she had always attended. She gave accurate threat assessments in plain language. She did not linger. But she did not leave either. On the 7th evening I found her in the east corridor that runs behind the great hall, looking out the stone window at the mountain in the dark. She did not move when I stopped beside her. We stood looking at the mountain, the white snowline and the black sky above it, and it was not awkward, which was new, or perhaps it was old. It was the thing it had always been when she was in a room, a simple absence of unease. "I owe you a better first conversation," I said. "I said that in the courtyard and I still mean it." "You've been giving me a week," she said. I didn't want to press. She looked at me sideways. "You sent me a formal letter yesterday." That was a professional communication about the spring tournament bracket. It was 4 paragraphs about the spring tournament bracket, and then 3 paragraphs that were not about the bracket. "The final paragraph," I said carefully, "was about the bracket." "The final sentence," she corrected. She looked back at the mountain. "You write better than you talk. It was a good letter." I had spent approximately 2 hours on that letter, and I was not going to tell her so. "I have things to say," I said, "that are easier to say when I'm looking at something else." I looked at the mountain. She looked at the mountain. The cold came through the stone window and neither of us moved away from it. I said I would be honest with you from now on. I meant that. I am going to say some things now, and I want you to know I am not saying them to move things forward faster than they should go. I'm saying them because they are true, and you are owed the truth. "All right," she said. "In the 8 months you ran the guard, I was aware that something was different. I told myself it was competence. That was partially true. The other part, which I did not investigate, was that you are the only person I have ever met who does not want anything from me that I didn't offer first. Every person in this hold wants something from me: attention, position, alliance, permission, favor. You wanted the work, and that was the end of it. I had not encountered that before, and I did not know what to do with it." She was quiet. "And then Dress recommended I end your position for reasons of political alliance, and I understood this was wrong, and I did it anyway. Because if I kept you in the hold, I would have to figure out what I was doing, and it was easier not to." I looked at the mountain. "That is the honest version." The cold came through the window. From somewhere below in the great hall, there was the sound of the evening fire being built up. "I know," she said. I looked at her. "I knew in September," she said. "Not the full shape of it, but enough. I knew you understood it was wrong." She was looking at the mountain again. "I didn't argue because arguing wouldn't have given me what I wanted." "What did you want?" "For it to have been your idea," she said. "Simple, even. Sarath Kale, arriving at the truth and saying it plainly, which was the thing she had always done, and the thing, I realized, that had frightened my counsel and steadied my wolf and made every room she entered more honest than it had been before she arrived." "I'm sorry," I said. "I should have." "Yes," she said, "you should have." She paused. "But you followed me into the snow. You made me say your name a great many times." 3, she said. I counted. I looked at the mark on my wrist, visible in the dark, the faint silver gold of it. Hers was the same, just visible at the edge of her sleeve. I said, "May I?" And she turned toward me, and I took her hand very carefully. The way you hold something you are not sure yet you have the right to hold. And she let me. And the marks on both our wrists warmed in the dark like something that has been waiting a long time to be acknowledged. We stood at the window with the mountain white in the distance and the fire building below and her hand in mine. And neither of us said anything else for a while, because everything that needed saying had been said, and what came after did not need words. That was the beginning. I do not tell this story as a story of triumph, because the triumph was hers. She walked out of a council chamber on a Tuesday without begging and went and won a winter tournament and stood in a frozen courtyard and made me ask. The only thing I did right in the whole of it was follow her into the snow. She runs the arena guard still. She is better at it than anyone has ever been at anything I have asked of them. She attends the morning briefings. She gives accurate threat assessments in plain language. She does not perform for me or for the court or for the hold lords who bow to her now with the particular respect of people who watched the Maitmark rise in a tournament arena and know a destined thing when they see one. She is Sarath, which is enough. It is more than enough. It is the most specific and sufficient thing I have ever been given, and I have not been foolish enough to do anything, but hold it carefully since the night we stood at the east corridor window with the mountain white outside and her hand in mine. My wolf does not pace any more. He has not paced since the frozen courtyard, since the 2 words she said in the cold, all right, even and clear and entirely her, and he has no need to. He was looking for her for 29 years. He found her in a spring tournament, and he was patient while I was foolish, and he was quiet when I needed to learn something, and he waited for the winter. He was right to wait. She was worth it. She has always been worth it, and the only shame in any of this is that I required a frozen courtyard and a Maitmark witnessed by 600 people, and 3 repetitions of her name before I was honest enough to say so. She does not hold this against me. She holds it lightly, the way she holds most things, with precision, without cruelty, with the particular dry edge that I have come to understand is her version of warmth, which is warmer than most people's open declaration. I am a better king than I was in September. I am a better man than I was in September. She would say these things are unrelated to her presence, and she would be wrong, and I would tell her so, and she would look at me with that sideways, almost not a smile, and say, all right, and that would be the end of the argument and also its entire resolution. All right. 2 words. The most important 2 words I have ever been given in a frozen courtyard by the woman who made me earn them. I intend to go on earning them for the rest of my life.